in the lobby when I started at 7:20. So I don't know. Anyway, I think Sanjay and the others didn't knock. So I don't know how it
Yeah.
works. We'll see. We'll figure it out.
Oh, if your door is open, we will walk in. Maybe like that. Admin should be there.
Now
Beautiful.
the door is
Beautiful.
open.
Beautiful. Come on in.
Come on in,
Yes.
absolutely.
That song.
Okay, so Mama is reading the
Okay.
seven realities, and there you go.
Okay.
Yes, Mama, over to you. Jai Baba.
Ah,
Yeah, Baba.
the seven realities:
All other mics on mute, please. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
existence, love, sacrifice, renunciation.
One of your devices have to go on mute.
I think it's already mute.
Okay, keep going.
Ah, existence, love, sacrifice. I don't know what is the problem.
It's better now. Go ahead.
Renunciation, knowledge, control, and surrender.
Okay, I think there's some echo problem. I'll finish it off today.
Okay.
Okay, all right.
Vidya, maybe your mic is not on mute.
I give. Okay, I can mute all. Yeah, I will just read it for today. It's been a long time since I read seven realities. So the seven realities: existence, love, sacrifice, renunciation, knowledge, control, and surrender. I give no importance to creed, dogma, caste, or the performance of religious ceremonies and rites, but to the understanding of the following seven realities. The only real existence is that of the one and only God, who is the self in every finite self. The only real love is the love for this infinity, God, which arouses an intense longing to see, know, and become one with its truth, God. The only real sacrifice is that in which, in pursuance of this love, all things, body, mind, position, welfare, and even life itself, are sacrificed. The only real renunciation is that which abandons, even in the midst of worldly duties, all selfish thoughts and desires. The only real knowledge is the knowledge that God is the inner dweller in good people and in so called bad, in saint and in so called sinner. This knowledge requires you to help all equally as circumstances demand without expectation of reward, when compelled to take part in a dispute, to act without the slightest trace of enmity or hatred, to try to make others happy with brotherly or sisterly feeling for each one, and to harm no one in thought, word, or deed, not even those who harm you. The only real control is the discipline of the senses to abstain from indulgence in low desires, which alone ensures absolute purity of character. The only real surrender is that in which poise is undisturbed by any adverse circumstance, and the individual, amidst every kind of hardship, is resigned with perfect calm to the will of God. Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai. With that, we go to Ways of the Masters. This is from part 2, and this is the last of the chapters of part 2 as per our classification. It's on the physical book, page 153. Ways of the Master. Subtitle: Masters ever ready to help. Masters are absolutely impersonal and universal in their consciousness, but for spiritual purposes, they can limit the scope of their work and also allow their manifested personality to become the center of the aspirations of their disciples. They use personal relationships as well-defined channels to pass on their help to those aspirants who become connected with them. The masters are always on the lookout for those who need and deserve their help, and the faintest gleams of spiritual yearnings are not overlooked by them. They foster and promote the advancement of all aspirants in multifarious ways that are unfailingly effective, although they might not necessarily be completely intelligible to others. Nature of their help. The help of a perfect master consists in making the spiritual journey of the aspirant sure and safe, as well as in shortening the time he might otherwise take to arrive at the goal. The aspirant may go a long way through independent search, but he is unable to cross the sixth plane without the help of a master. Even on the intermediate planes of involution of consciousness, the help of a master is extremely valuable because he prevents the aspirant from getting stuck on the way and protects him from the pitfalls and dangers with which the spiritual path is beset. Kabir, the perfect master, has compared the three stages of the path to the three phases of fire. Just as first there is only smoke and no fire, then there is fire enveloped in smoke, and lastly, there is only fire without smoke. So the beginnings of the path are enveloped in thick ignorance, midway there is confused perception of the goal, and finally there is realization of truth without the slightest alloy of illusion. Since the path lies through illusions of many kinds, the aspirant is never safe without the guidance of a master who knows all the stages of the path and can take him through them. Abode of delusion. Before the opening of the inner eye, the mind conceives of the goal as the infinite, and this conception is based upon some symbolic image of infinity, such as the sky or the ocean, which suggests the idea of vastness. Although such a concept of the infinite is clear and well defined, it has to be superseded by the direct perception of the infinite. The aspirant sees the self directly when his inner eye of the spirit is opened. When this happens, the mind is dazed by what it sees and is no longer as clear as it was before the opening of this inner eye. Being dazed by the perception of the self, the mind loses its capacity to think clearly and mistakes the seeing of the self with its being actually realized. Hence comes the illusion of being at the end of the path when one is still traversing it. In Sufi terms, this particular part of the path is known as Muqam-e-Afsan, or the abode of delusion. It is in such difficult phases of the path that the master can, through his skillful intervention, give a push to the aspirant so that he keeps on going instead of getting caught up on the way. Contribution of master. In fact, there is danger of the aspirant being detained on each one of the inner planes because each in its own way is very alluring and serves as a trap for the aspirant. The master either takes the aspirant past these planes or through them without unnecessary delay. However, the aspirant has to walk his own way. The contribution of the master consists in confirming and consolidating the previously acquired intuitions and perceptions of the aspirant, and in precipitating his consciousness into the next stage, which, though unavoidable, is by its nature impossible for the aspirant to anticipate. Implicit faith. The master uses Maya to take the disciple out of Maya, and as he is himself beyond good and evil, he may often require things that are unacceptable and even shocking to the ordinary good sense of his disciples. The best thing for the disciple to do is follow the instructions of the master with implicit faith without bringing them to the bar of his limited capacity of judgment. The following famous instances illustrate this point. There is this Quranic story of Abraham being called upon to sacrifice his beloved son Ishmael to the Lord. When Abraham, firm in his resolve and faith, was about to slaughter Ishmael, God intervened and accepted the sacrifice of a ram as ransom for the son. When Shams-e-Tabriz ordered Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi, his disciple, to fetch wine for him, he unflinchingly complied in order to please and win the grace of his master. At the time, the Maulana commanded a large following of Muslim divines because of his reputation as a great theologian in the Islamic world, and wine is religiously prohibited, haram, to the Muslims. Hence, it was a crucial test for the Maulana to carry a jar of wine on his shoulders through the streets, but he did it. Gaushali Shah was asked by one of his masters, who lived in a hut by the side of the river Ganges, to fill a vessel with water for drinking, but only from midstream. It was about midnight, and the river Ganges was in heavy flood because of the monsoon. The disciple hesitated at first, but finally gathered courage to attempt the impossible, believing in the omniscience of the master. No sooner had he stepped into the angry waters of the Ganges than he witnessed a wonderful transformation of the scene. Instead of surging waves and floods, the river had turned into a thin stream, and the vessel to be filled almost touched the riverbed. The disciple nearly crossed the river to the opposite bank in search of midstream. While thus occupied, the master appeared on the scene and asked him the reason for his delay. When Gaushali Shah explained that the mid-current could not be located, the master allowed him to fill the vessel by handfuls and himself helped in the process. The master then left the disciple on some pretext, asking him to follow immediately after filling the vessel. When Gaushali Shah returned to the hut with the vessel full of water, he was bewildered to learn from other disciples that the master had never left the hut for a minute during his absence, but was talking to them all the while about him. So, ordinary methods. There is a glossary reference to Quranic. Maybe we can do it at the end of this chapter. These ordinary methods, these stories show how the masters may use their powers on rare occasions to break down the ego of their disciples or help them further along the path. As a rule, the masters are very sparing in the use of their divine powers, and they never use them unless it is absolutely necessary for spiritual purposes. Ordinarily, they secure their purposes through normal, mundane ways. While doing so, they not only exhibit great understanding, a keen sense of humor, unending patience, and consummate tact, but they also take great trouble to help their disciples and adjust themselves in numberless ways to whatever might be entailed by the needs of the situation. Story of Bahlal. Some of these points are effectively brought out by the story of the great mystic Bahlal. Bahlal wanted to contact certain notables of Persia for reasons of his own. The only way to do this was to go to the prince's party that was attended by these notables. Unfortunately, Bahlal was bald-headed, and in those days, no one without hair was allowed to attend a party given by the prince. The prince had lost all his hair, and to see others without hair reminded him of it and prevented him from enjoying the party. Since the prince was very sensitive on this point, no one bald was allowed to come to the party. So when bald Bahlal went to the party in his shabby clothes, he was thrown out. The party lasted for 3 days, however, and on the second day, Bahlul borrowed some fine clothes and a wig, disguised himself, and again went to the party. During the party, no one recognized Bahlul, and in his fine clothes, he made a great impression upon all the notables. He made himself so agreeable that even the prince offered him a warm welcome and invited him to sit near him. No sooner was Bahlul seated than he winked at the prince. The prince did not understand the meaning of his winking, but vaguely felt that such a gesture from an illustrious man like him must mean something important. Thinking that it immediately required a suitable response, he also winked. Those who were nearby saw this exchange of winking and felt impelled to imitate them. They also winked at each other, and soon the winking spread throughout the crowd, so that for 5 minutes the party saw nothing but winking. Then Balul cried, "Stop, you wise men, why do you wink?" And the notables replied, "We are winking because you great men were winking." Ashok, you have to mute. You're on two devices and causing an echo. Thanks. Then Balul cried, "Stop, oh you wise men, why do you wink?" And the notables replied, "We are winking because you great men were winking. We only imitate you." Then immediately Balul took off his wig and said, "We too are both bald. Imitate us." The notables then went away, and on the third day they all came with shaved heads. Then Balun turned to the prince and said, "We too are permanently bald. These men will have to shave their heads daily in order to remain bald." Thus, through his tactful handling and sense of humor, he secured access to those whom he wanted to help. Dealing with failings of disciples. The Sadguru takes infinite pains to contact and win over the disciple for spiritual life. Since the progress of the disciple is secured only if his love for the master is not allowed to dwindle, he takes every care to remove all obstacles that might be standing in the way of the wholehearted devotion of the disciple. If sometimes he is seen to humor the individual nature of the disciple, it is only to keep those obstacles from creating a serious impediment in his way. Sometimes he might even seem to feed the ego of the disciple, but all this is just allowing full scope to the ignorance of the disciple. It is only a preparation for the final extinguishing of his ego, just as animals to be offered in sacrifice are carefully nurtured before their annihilation. The master is himself beyond good or evil and is not perturbed by the failings of the disciple. He tolerates them with unfailing patience and infinite capacity to wait, knowing fully well that once the disciple gets established on the path, these failings will be swiftly washed away. Once the master is satisfied that the disciple is firmly established on the path, he is keen to cleanse the mind of the disciple of all blemishes. Often he achieves this task even at the risk of appearing ruthless, just as when a surgeon, completely disregarding the protests of the patients, is active with his knife. Ultimately, the disciple cannot fail to see that all such measures are really in his interest. Therefore, he is never pushed away from his master, but is drawn closer to him in the very process of the cleansing that might have appeared irksome or painful. Help through praise. The usual method of the master, however, is as sweet and agreeable for the disciple as it is effective. The master is very pleased when the disciple shows any real progress in the spiritual life. By conferring well-merited praise on the disciple, he confirms in him the spiritual qualities he is in the process of realizing and arouses in him the confidence that will enable him to cope with any situation. The glow of noble emotion, a gesture of self-denial, a heroic sacrifice, or an incident revealing extraordinary patience or love or faith, any one of these is sufficient to make the master happy and evoke his approbation. The usual method of the master to encourage the good qualities in the disciple is plain and unconcealed appreciation of his attainments. The disciple soon begins to value the master's approval and delights in it more than in anything else. He is ready to resist the greatest of temptations and undergo the most trying ordeals, which would otherwise have seemed impossible to him, if only he knows that this will make the master happy. Solution of all problems. Since the master is, for the aspirant, a symbol of the Supreme Self in all, the problem of true adjustment to the master appears to him to be the same as realizing his own inner divinity and arriving at true adjustment with all other forms of the Supreme Self. Through his allegiance to the master, the aspirant achieves conscious appreciation of the fundamental unity of all these problems. From the psychological point of view, he is in a position to tackle them not as separate problems, but as aspects of one problem. Thus, he can arrive at true integration, which is different from a temporary compromise between conflicting claims. In order to help the disciple achieve this difficult task, the master has to become the nucleus of all the spiritual idealism of the aspirant. Because intensive concentration of mental energy is necessary if the aspirant is to break through the many barriers that lie between him and his goal. Supreme claim of one's own master. The supreme claim of the master cannot be challenged or limited even by the spontaneous reverence that the disciple is bound to feel for masters other than the one who has accepted him. All perfect masters are one in their consciousness, and it is absurd to imagine any grades between them. Though one master is not greater than another, the disciple must, for his own purposes, place the claim of his own master over and above the claims of other masters until he transcends the domain of duality and realizes the unity of all life. Mental energy would be dissipated unless there arose a supremely imperative claim among the many conflicting claims of life. Exclusive concentration upon one master is therefore usually indispensable for the gathering up of the dispersed mental energy of the disciple. In very rare cases, owing to special circumstances, the masters themselves might decide to share the spiritual work in relation to a particular disciple. There are therefore exceptional cases of disciples who have had to affiliate themselves to two or more masters. This is an exception rather than the rule, and where there are more masters than one, they arrange the distribution of their work so carefully that they do not set up any conflict of claims. Again, a very, very beautiful chapter, and I'll pause here now for comments, questions, and any summarization.
So as the chapter says, master knows what is to be done. It is better to surrender, not to say do anything else to the master.
Absolutely. The only pitfall is be sure you found the master right now. That pitfall is there.
Jai Baba, this is Kama here. I
Yes,
think
Kama.
the last two chapters which we read, true discipleship and the ways of the masters, definitely it's very clear why it's very important to have a perfect master or God-man or man-God or the avatar guiding us. Of course, the ideal situation is if you have a live perfect master, somebody in a human body, and you surrender to him, that is the ideal situation. But at least in our cases or in my case, even though Baba is not in physical form, he has said that he's available to all of us, formless in his formless aspect. And I think Vidya would be able to extrapolate on that later. So I personally feel that, if you throw any kind of challenges or issues that one is going in our personal life or professional life to Baba, if you wait patiently, he gives you the answers. And the other thing in the takeaway on this chapter is, in the earlier paragraph, it says the masters are always on the lookout for those who need and deserve their help. And this is very clear, that the teacher comes when the student is ready. So the masters are always looking for spiritual aspirants who are dedicated and sincere in their, search for God realization. The other thing is about the abode of delusion, which talks about how we can get stuck in the planes. And I think this is where it's interesting when Baba went around traveling all over the country to meet musts, not only for doing inner work, but in my understanding to actually help them to go to the next plane, because a lot of these musts are kind of stuck in a particular plane of existence, whether it's in the subtle or mental plane. And here he also says the master uses Maya to take the disciple out of Maya and implicit faith. I think if you remember the chapter on God and Maya, part 4 is completely on faith. So I don't have to go reading about that. But faith is so important, of course, based on complete conviction. And this chapter actually has a lot of analogies. As you see, he has used different examples of Shams-e Tabriz, Gausali Shah, and then a story of Balul to kind of emphasize how the perfect masters, kind of work to get their disciples to do, or to help their disciples. And one more thing is in the last few paragraphs, since the master is for the aspirant a symbol of the supreme self in all, the problem of true adjustment to the master appears to him to be the same as realizing his own inner divinity and arriving at true adjustment with all other forms of the Supreme Self. This is almost related to the Parvadiga prayer, and it also kind of answers what, that day when Vidya was giving a talk on God realization. The first question she asked, what is the avatar for you? So this is kind of answers in one way. And the other one is about in order to help the disciple achieve this difficult task, the master has to become the nucleus of all the spiritual idealism of the aspirant, because intensive concentration of mental energy is necessary if the aspirant is to break through. And again, in the last paragraph, first line, it says, exclusive concentration upon one master is therefore usually indispensable for the gathering up of the dispersed mental energy. So personally for me, I was a big spiritual shopper till Baba came into my life. So this is a perfect example that, once you are tied to a particular master with full conviction, don't get distracted. And there was one more line which said, there are therefore exceptional cases of disciples who have had to affiliate themselves to two or more masters. It kind of reminds me of Gustadji, as you know. He was with Babajan, then he was with Upasni Maharaj, and then he came to Meher Baba. But of course, he was directed. So that just gave me some, some example of, being with two or more masters. Vidya, can you add something to this whole aspect of, following the perfect master, disciple, etc., discipleship? Jai Baba.
I think pretty much everything is covered, and the chapter itself is self-explanatory. And I think you have beautifully said everything that has to be said. I don't have anything to add as of now.
Great. So we'll just finish that glossary in a real quick manner. Anybody went to the page already? 1 second.
So on page 410.
Okay, thank you.
Kama, I wanted to ask you, there was this book, The Wayfarers by William Donkin. Is there a PDF copy available somewhere?
Yes, the digital copy is available on the net. Yes, and the Meher Baba Trust thing, it's on the books on Baba. It's at the bottom.
Okay, I'll check it out. Yeah, thank you.
So it was Quranic, right? That was the word. Or was it Abraham? Oh.
Abraham, that is second the page.
Okay. Yeah. The prophet, the patriarch in the Quranic story, Ibrahim, is called upon to sacrifice his own son Ishmael. In the Bible, he's called upon to sacrifice his son Isaac. Okay, so that's all. It's just a reference. So with that, we finish part 4. So we have finished part 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now we go to part 5, which is yoga and meditation. We start with action and inaction, correct?
Yeah, go ahead. I'll just add a quick note here.
Sure.
We have almost finished half the chapters, and as you know, we have classified this whole discourses into 7 parts. The first one was God and Maya. Second one was avatars and perfect masters. Third one was reincarnation and karma. Fourth was spirit and matter. And now the fifth one is yoga and meditation. The first 4 chapters, approximately you can look at it as a macro approach on right knowledge to understand the concepts of God, Maya, and so on and so forth. So now this yoga and meditation, from my understanding, is the action aspect. You know, the karma yoga, bhakti yoga, jnana yoga, all those kind of things are beautifully explained here. How each one of us can use different techniques to be closer to Baba, to increase our love. So that is how I've categorized this whole thing, yoga and meditation, as part of the right action, which is the 99% perspiration aspect. And the sixth and seventh, sixth is consciousness and sanskaras, and the seventh one is love and ego, which are basically the main thing that we are dealing with on our day-to-day life. So that I've kept it in that's more of a micro level approach, Jai Baba, thanks.
Great. Thanks for that summary and introduction. So we'll go to page 76 on the physical book, action and inaction. Yeah. Forms and ceremonies are sidetracks on the path is the next subtitle. The first para is without a subtitle. All action except that which is intelligently designed to attain God realization creates a binding for consciousness. It is not only an expression of accumulated ignorance, but a further addition to that accumulated ignorance. Forms and ceremonies are sidetracks on the path. Religious forms and ceremonies, as well as rituals and injunctions of different creeds and spiritual institutions, have a tendency to encourage the spirit of love and worship. As such, they are helpful to a limited extent in wearing out the ego shell in which the human consciousness is caught. But if they are unintelligently and mechanically followed, the inner spirit of love and worship gets dried up. Then they only result in hardening the ego shell than wearing it out. Therefore, rituals and ceremonies cannot carry man very far on the spiritual path. And if they are unintelligently followed, they create as much binding as any other unintelligent action. Deprived of all inner life and meaning, they might be said to be even more dangerous than other forms of unintelligent action, because man pursues them with the belief that they are helpful for God realization, whereas in fact they are far from being helpful. Owing to this element of self-delusion, lifeless forms and ceremonies become sidetracks on the path. Often, through mere force of habit, man becomes so attached to these external forms that he cannot be disillusioned about their imaginary value except through intense suffering.
Karthik, just
Yeah.
pause for a second.
Sure.
The ceremonies that we are referring to, the rituals and ceremonies that we are referring to. Now, I'll share my experience. I and Kama went to Maharashtra trip, and we visited various centers, Baba centers, and we met many people in this trip. In 10 days, we covered almost 8 centers, and
Volume?
Is it volume a problem?
No, actually, it's coming through fine. Others?
Your volume has
I
suddenly
can
come
hear
down. Yeah,
quite okay.
yeah, better. Yeah.
Okay, keep going.
So we went to centers and we met many people. And we found that they are all genuine Baba lovers. There is no doubt that their love for Baba was so genuine, and they were going through many difficulties in their life which we can't imagine. The people who are living in metros are very fortunate in a way, because lot of comforts come without even asking for it. By default, we get it. But in villages, there were a lot of issues that people were facing, and Baba had given them a lot more troubles in their life. Now, without deviating, when it came to rituals, unknowingly, because of their conditioning, they were following a lot of rituals in Baba centers. They would do aartis, dhoops, deeps, and all that stuff. And for them, it is an engagement, and having a program, going to center, participating in the satsang was very important for them. And the organizers as such, and the people who are very regular, personally confided to me that they were finding it very ritualistic of going to Baba's center, participating in the program, but not getting anything out of it at the end. And in the Nagpur center, which was the bigger city and all that, we also found that they are doing an aarti which was like done, which was done like you do it in a gurudwara, where you are given a chance to go and hold the thing and do this aarti thing which we do, and turn by turn everyone was going, and they offered me also because I would give a talk that day, and I denied to take the aarti and told them that, we do, Baba has said these things and I won't do it. Now, the rituals part of it, whether it is on our own life or whether when we are demonstrating, it is very important to not to follow the crowd, because everyone is doing it. That is why it is requires a great courage for Baba lover to live Baba's instructions, because even when other people are doing it, we have to stand up for something that Baba has told us to do or not to do. Now, these are very important things. So in the chapter when when there is this thing about rituals and all that, I wanted to mention it, that it is important to live Baba's instructions and follow guidelines without following the rituals. Like if you are doing anything at the same time in the same way, sooner or later it becomes a ritual, and we should be aware of it. That was my learning. Hey, Baba.
Vidya, one more thing. Do you think this is appropriate time to talk about also, like in Yavatmal, all those people were going through different kinds of suffering and they were asking those questions, why this is happening to me?
Yeah, if everyone is interested, I could share those stories because they were very interesting stories, but I don't know if group wants to go through the reading or they want to have this sharing.
No, I
Whatever
think these stories are related and I think it accelerates the learning. So why not, please?
Sure.
Okay. So I will share what happened in Yavatmal. Yavatmal is a very small place in Maharashtra. I don't know where exactly. Wardha is from Wardha, Kama. Where is it? Some interior place from
Yes,
Wardha, right?
Wardha, the Marathwada region, near the Nagpur, Yavatmal, or Chandrapur, all those are in the same region, like Marathwada region.
Yeah. So there are, this is a small place, and I think about 5,000 people live in that village, 5 or 10,000 people, very small place. And they have constructed a beautiful center. And there is this Mr. Deshpande, there's this guy, and I should tell his story first because he's the most eligible Baba lover who should be spoken about. He's this guy who's from he's from a poor family, I would say, and he was working for army. And when he left army, they gave him some land and in Yavatmal. And this guy donated. He had nothing. He just got this 1 or 2 acres of land, and he gave away that land for Baba Center. He went and registered that land for Baba Center, and then other people came in and they put one center there in place. And of course, now he moved to Nagpur for some other reasons, but then he's the one man. And he's like so inspiring for the other people, because through his actions, the kind of sacrifices he makes to do Baba's work. He travels he gave his 8 days of his life to travel with us and take us through center to center and introduced us to people, and we interacted. Now, in Yavatmal, we saw all these people who were Baba lovers, maybe some 500, 400 or 500 of them living in that village, were going through the same kind of problems. And the problems were like they have lost their loving one. Everyone had, in every family, there was a death, and someone's husband had died, someone's wife had died, someone's mother was not there. There was, when we went there, and then people spoke after the talk when they surrounded me, they were only talking about, we lost this one, we lost this one, and everyone was grieving. And the only question they had was, why is Baba putting us through so many problems? Why does we all love Baba? And they didn't read much. They have not read any of these books because most of them are in English, and they only know Marathi. So they've not read anything, but they blindly love Baba. And I found the quality of love was so superior to many people. Even I think I would place myself at that stage, even maybe I would nothing in front of them. So they had such superior love for Baba. And there was this one lady, I probably don't want to reveal her name, but I don't remember also her name as of now. So this couple had, these are twin women, girls, who married brothers of another family. And this story was very touching for us. In fact, Kama and I was totally in silence after listening, and it was very difficult to work with that woman when she asked me all difficult questions. So what happened in her life was she and her husband was traveling in the afternoon around 2 o'clock they were on their bike, and they were going to some place, and something hit them and they met with a major accident. And husband and wife both were injured very badly. And this lady was Baba lover, and she was very, she had complete faith in Baba. And as she was lying on the road, on the side of the road in the afternoon, she kept saying, Meher Baba, Meher Baba, Meher Baba. She was like really praying God. And that is a place where no ambulances come, and no one was passing by because it was a remote village, and it was an afternoon. So and she kept praying because there was no one to help. So she kept praying, Meher Baba, Meher Baba. And there was this ambulance that had passed by from nowhere. That ambulance came, and then the ambulance stopped, and they were put in the ambulance. They were taken to hospital. And when the police case was booked, since it was an accident, there's a police case, and they tried inquiring where the ambulance came from. Till date, they are not able to not able to find out where the ambulance came from, and the details of ambulance is still not known. So and she lost, both husband and wife lost their legs in the accident, and there were multiple surgeries that are performed on them, and then they're barely able to limp and walk around even today. They have two children, and they are staying in faith in Baba. And then she's also mentioned various other incidents. There were many difficulties in her life. Like one example she gave me was in a dark night when there was no power that day for some reason, and she was not. She had been operated on the leg, and there were no one in the house, or something happened, and she was in the dark room, and then one scorpion sat on her leg, and the scorpion was there, and she could see, and she's screaming, and she was not able to move anything and not do anything about it, but there was scorpion sitting on her leg, and she kept shouting, help, help, help. And after a long time, she was there for a long time, and then someone came to help her, and that guy tried to remove the scorpion from her leg, and the scorpion bit that guy who was trying to who removed the scorpion on her leg, and nothing happened to her. So the scorpion was there for so long, nothing happened to her. And she gives the total credit to Meher Baba, saying that though he has given me a lot of difficulties, but he's always helped me through this process. then she asked me why am I going through it and all that. So I had a long interview with her, and she also gave a talk that day in the center. And told her story. So the story goes like this: when she delivered the first baby, she was almost dead after the delivery. She all died, and she had this out of body experience of Baba coming, and she had this. She narrated it very beautifully. She said that there was a lotus and all that, and Baba came and picked her up, and she kept telling Baba, Baba, I want to go back. There's a baby just now come into the life, and I want to go back for the baby. Who look after the baby and all that? And she pleaded Baba, and Baba told, no, it's not good for you, don't go, come with me. And Baba wanted to take her, but she desperately prayed Baba to come back, to come back, to come back. And then she says from that out of body experience, she came back to life, and then her life continued, and then this accident and everything has happened later. So I asked her, see, why are you asking me why Baba's giving me so many problems? But Baba helped you by asking you to come with me. He wanted you to leave the body, and he knew that if you continued in the body, you would have more problems. But your choice was that you want to come back for the baby. And now, because that was Baba's choice, and that was good for you, but now this is your choice that you wanted to be in this world. So you can't ask Baba, why are you doing this for me? Once you've chosen your free will, and Baba has also maybe amended something, or it was part of his divine plan for you to give a choice, and you chose this, then there is no point in asking Baba, why am I going through difficulties? Similarly, there were many other people, and then we had a lot of chat with a lot of people, and everyone had similar something like this, like why we have going through and all. And it is very interesting that how Baba works, and I know that he's seriously working with those bunch of souls, and doing some good there. And this is one of the stories. There are many Varda stories, but one place is with my very interesting story. Yeah.
Jai Baba.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Vidya. So with that, we'll continue with action and inaction. Life seeks freedom from self-created entanglement. In many ways, inaction is preferable to unintelligent action, for it has at least the merit of not creating.
Sorry, Karthik. This was beautiful, Vidya. Thank you for sharing this for all of us.
Sure.
Accidents are something which, when the energies are very hard, and the karmic are, it's difficult to even repair by masters. So in many lifetimes, you do something which is not appropriate. You are a good soul, or maybe connected with avatar, but in between, maybe out of fear, or whatever your journey was. So avatar does this through accident. Many Baba lovers you must have been heard about it, have experiences of before coming to Baba. Even Rahul, if you talk to Rahul, I have a major accident. So he just somehow break that path, or break those energies, or remove the entire, he create a new plan. When he create a new plan, new path, new destiny, or new horizon, he does that. He removes all the old karmic, and it is a blessing from the master. We take it otherwise, but it is his, that he removes all the whatever we did in the past life, or like for me, the lesson was, I have been an actress in many lifetimes, and I was just repeating myself by doing that. So he just gave me a major, I had a accident, I lost my bad accident, but I can see that energies are going out of my body. Lots of colors were going. So that and later, this was I think 2-3 years back before coming to Meher
So
Baba.
you stopped being an actor after the accident?
No, it was very beautiful. I'll talk to on Saturday, Sunday whenever I'll get time about it. But I just wanted to mention that accident is somewhere then a avatar is prepare the soul for another journey.
Right.
It's basically it's hastening the process actually.
See, Rahul had an accident and he's in Mehrabad. The boy has no nothing, no the kind of life he was leading. He was in Juhu somewhere and a film director and all those, and his mind is still like that. And he's in Mehrabad in this period. At this time, he's in Mehrabad. So that is how master works, and this is one of the things. So, and many, I think, many residents of Mehrabad, if you ask them, they have many experiences of accidents with the railway. Baba, there is a railway track. There are many stories related to the railway track. So we'll talk about it later. But this is the affirmation that the entire place is going through something, and Baba is doing something very, very important there. And you were fortunate to be a part of that team and that group, and you met all those beautiful souls. So thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. I think that that brings also focus, brings back to the previous chapter we read on Master's ways of working with disciples for their own good. So I think what happens in the material world when we go through these difficulties, from spiritual angle, he's doing good. From material angle, it looks like going through a lot of difficulties. And many times, with a limited mind, we also judge other fellow passengers. If he or she is going through a lot of difficulties, we unknowingly judge the other soul, saying he must have done, or she must have done something that she is going through all these things. But what is important to know is that we really do not know the journey of the soul, whether it's good or bad is happening, or his past karma was bad, or master is working with that person to bring him up to the speed. So very important to be non-judgmental, and every time we pass a judgment, awareness is required, and so absolute alertness is required on spiritual journey.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yep. So accidents can be an abrupt intervention, hastening of the process, like Sanjay said, and finally, all of it is the workings of the master. So, and let's continue our journey with action and inaction. So the subtitle, I'll start again from this paragraph. So life seeks freedom from self-created entanglement. In many ways, inaction is preferable to unintelligent action, for it at least has the merit of not creating further samskaras and complications. Even good and righteous action creates sanskaras and means one more addition to the complications created by past actions and experiences. All life is an effort to attain freedom from self-created entanglement. It is a desperate struggle to undo what has been done in ignorance, to throw away the accumulated burden of the past, to find rescue from the debris left by a series of temporary achievements and failures. Life seeks to unwind the limiting samskaras of the past and to obtain release from the mazes of its own making, so that its further creations may spring directly from the heart of eternity and bear the stamp of unhampered freedom and intrinsic richness of being that knows no limitation.
Thank you, Bob.
Yeah.
This is the answer.
Yeah.
Thank you, Baba.
Inaction, often necessary stage. Action that helps in attaining God is truly intelligent and spiritually fruitful because it brings release from bondage. It is second only to the to that action that springs spontaneously from the state of God realization itself. All other forms of action, however good or bad, and however effective or ineffective from a worldly point of view, contribute toward bondage and are inferior to inaction. Inaction is less helpful than intelligent action, but it is better than unintelligent action, for it amounts to the non-doing of that which could have created a binding. The movement from unintelligent action to intelligent action, that is from binding karma to non-binding karma, is often through inaction. This is characteristic of the stage where unintelligent action has stopped because of critical doubt, but intelligent action has not yet begun because no adequate momentum has arisen. This special type of inaction, which plays its part in progress on the path, should in no way be confused with ordinary inaction, which springs from inertia or fear of life. Okay, with that, this is a small chapter, but I think it was a very, very important chapter where he's classified action into three things: unintelligent action, inaction, and intelligent action. And the progression is that we have to move from unintelligent action, which creates bindings, to intelligent action that is free of binding. And I think the only other distinction he makes is the only thing that's superior to that is that of the infinite, the action from the state of God realization itself, right? So any other comments?
Yeah,
or thoughts?
I just wanted on the last line, sorry for speaking so much and taking time, but I can't just stop myself.
Sure, sure.
So on this last line, he said this type of special inaction, which plays its part in progress on the path, which is no way to be confused with ordinary inaction, which springs from the inertia or fear of life. I think this is the quality of a matured aspirant who chooses inaction and maintains the poise. And the poise is a word that Baba used sometimes to tell how to maintain poise and when to maintain poise. This is the quality of a advanced aspirant to getting to so that it doesn't mean maintaining doing having a do not acting or not responding is not because out of weakness, but it is out of it's the strength that you choose to not act, but not out of fear, but out of maturity that you don't act. So this poise is required on the spiritual path many times. Okay, Baba.
Correct.
Also the bhav that everything is Baba doing. Whatever is happening is, it's all Baba. So if it is an intelligent or unintelligent action also, if you say it is all Baba, so at least the karmic you can, you are not a part of that karmic section or a karmic.
Neha, I agree with you. Totally, I agree with you. But I
I'm not
request
able
you to
to.
look at little go beyond this. That one should be aware that in the name of surrenderance and transferring the burden on Baba, the action has to be from a point of view that you know what is the action, you know what is the next steps, and you take total responsibility of it. But you choose not to act.
Yes, of
You
course.
choose
Yes.
not. You choose not to act because
Correct.
many times we see Baba lovers saying, "This Baba will handle. Baba will handle," because
Not
they're shifting the
one should not be
responsibility.
irresponsible about it. One should not
Yeah,
be irresponsible about it. But
correct,
yeah,
correct,
what you're saying is
yeah,
right. That's the step.
correct, correct, correct. Thank you. Yeah, Baba.
Jay Baba, this is Kama here. This chapter, Action and Inaction, is just 2 pages. For me, it was like one of the most important. And, I think I'm going to give a homework to Karthik for the last paragraph. Now, Vidya put it in a beautiful way in a qualitative sense. So let me give you on a quantitative sense, the mathematical thing. I've developed a formula on this. The chapter says action and inaction. And there is also what you call as intelligent and unintelligent action, intelligent inaction, and unintelligent inaction. So you have like 4 kinds. And there is a fifth one, which you see in the last paragraph on the top line, which says,
Yeah.
action that helps in attaining God is truly intelligent and spiritually fruitful because it brings release from bondage. It is second only to that action that springs spontaneously from the state of God realization itself. So I've got this formula, which is like a top-down approach. There are actually 5 types. The first one, which I just read, I call it, I've got an acronym ASSGR, SGR, which means action springing spontaneously from the state of God realization. This is basically God realized people who don't have any sanskaras. They are operating from the yoga sanskaras. Now, after this comes from intelligent action, where basically in the involution state, we are unwinding sanskaras. Then below that is intelligent inaction, where actually this is the middle path between unintelligent action and intelligent action. So unintelligent action is basically spending sanskaras during the reincarnation state, and intelligent action is unwinding sanskaras during the involution state. And the last one is the unintelligent inaction. I'll give you an example. When I used to live in New York, on the weekends, when my wife used to be away on tours, I used to be just sitting in the 15th floor apartment, and for 48 hours I would just go into a kind of what do you call, like totally a negative way of living, like drinking, smoking, watching TV, the whole thing, like there was no discipline, like completely, like it was a, what do you call, there's a word for it which I forget, but those 48 hours would be a completely almost like a debaucherous kind of life, and then next morning I would get up on Monday and just go to work 5 days and I'm normal, like. So that is an form of unintelligent inaction, where you're just sitting and doing nothing, being lazy, lethargic, all those kind of things, and I think the one that Vidya talked about, intelligent inaction, comes to very advanced spiritual aspirants, where they seem to be not doing anything, but actually they are doing a lot. And this is especially for God realized people like Madzubs who are sitting, and people think they are doing nothing, but actually they are doing a lot of inner work. So that's an example of kind of intelligent inaction from a different perspective. Yeah, Baba, thanks.
Guruji, what is the homework?
You're going to do the last paragraph and give me like your take on it.
No, but I think this is crying for a chart. This is crying for a chart.
Yes,
so I thought I'll create a chart.
Yeah.
One thing I can add here.
With example.
Unintelligent action adds on to your karmic load.
Yes.
And it doesn't dilute.
Yes.
Correct.
It's later on when you read about sanskaras chapter, you will come across this term unwinding sanskaras, spending sanskaras, and winding sanskaras. So these are just terminologies to understand what happens to sanskaras at different stages of evolution, reincarnation, and involution. So in summary, winding sanskaras is only during the evolution state. Once you become a human being where you're in the reincarnation state, you are spending sanskaras, you're experiencing all the impressions. And then all these gross impressions will slowly go to subtle impressions. And that is where once you start from the first plane, in the plane of involution, it is called unwinding sanskaras. So this is the description or definition or terminology. Yeah, Baba.
Sure. So I'll work with you on creating something. We'll see if we can come up with something creative for the group.
Yeah, I would request everybody to read this chapter very thoroughly, because this is like a jigsaw puzzle, I'm telling you, and it's all to do with practical action. How we deal with our day-to-day life. It's a beautiful chapter.
Yes.
It's like a jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah. Great. So I think we are out of time.
Jai Baba.
Have a great day. Have a great day, and look forward to seeing you all tomorrow.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Baba.